Hi, I'm artist, and rendering is just hard, you agree? So here's an attempt to break that process down for anyone who is struggling, and including me of course. So previously on this channel, I made a video where I showed you guys how to simplify details, and this will be a sort of continuation to that video because today I will focus on the last step, rendering. But before we do that, let's do a quick recap about all of the previous steps using this painting of a cup of water and a cake as an example. And this will become the April wallpaper for the monthly wallpaper club, by the way. So let's start. The step before the first step, observing, which I had already done beforehand, and for this painting, I wanted to combine these two reference images together. One was a cup of water and the other was a really interesting looking cake. And personally, I really enjoyed the lighting setup of the water reference, so I planned to use that as a setup for the whole piece, which meant the lighting would come from the top left hand corner, and that also meant I would have to change the lighting for the cake. As for the material, we had a glass cup of water, ceramic dishes with blue decorations, and a 3-tier cake with blue to white ombre cream, and some berries. And also, everything would be set on the table instead of cloth, like in the original reference. With all of those in mind, let's move on to the first actual step, sketching, which past me has already been doing on the screen over here. And as usual, for this step, as long as we understand the relative position and size of all the objects in the painting, it is good. So something like this is good. Moving on to step number 2, color picking. For this one, as usual, we will pick 2 to 3 colors for each material. And what is a material? It is anything with different color. And for more details, please go visit the original video. I explain things a lot more clearly over there. So here for the dishes, we have 3 materials: the white ceramic, the light blue, and the dark blue decorations. As for the glass, since it is transparent, it will borrow the colors from the dish itself, because that's what we see the most through the cup. And I will add just one more decorate in there for this part. And for the cake, we have the white cream and blue cream. And for the berries, we are fortunate that all of these berries have the same colors, so they are counted as one material. And I also planned to sprinkle some golden yellow accent in there, so it's another material. And that's pretty much the color palette. And as always, doing it is quick, explaining it in words is just way longer than it should be. Words are hard, concise words are way harder. Anyway, in the span of present me explaining, past me has already gone on doing the third step, blocking, in which we will use all the colors we just picked to block in the big shapes. And this one right here is one below average example of how this step should be done. So for blocking, what we aim at is establishing a clear and simple version of the painting using only big shapes. And you will know you have succeeded when you turn off the sketch layer and still can tell which object is which and where the lighting is coming from. With that in mind, here's one of the best examples of how that should be done. From just one glance, you can tell where things are supposed to be and where the light and shadow should be. And here's on the screen. As you can see, is one example that is below average but still within the acceptable range, because even though the shapes are blurry and almost non-existent, we can still vaguely understand how the light and the shadow should be. So yes, we can still work with this. It just requires some more refining in the next step, rendering, which also is the actual main stuff we will talk about today. Yes, this is the main dish, finally. Anyway, there's 2 things I usually focus on in this step, refining the shapes and texturing, which depending on the methods can kind of merge into one thing or separate into 2 smaller sub-steps. Yes, we have multiple methods here, not just raw dogging everything anymore, I know, very fancy. But first, we still have to talk about the raw dog method. So first thing first, what is it? Well, as the name suggests, this is a method where you use only your hand to paint every single details you see in the reference. No gimmicks, no shortcuts, no fancy brushes, just paint stroke by stroke. And this is where the refining the shapes and texturing kinda become one process, because essentially what we will do here is gradually breaking down the big shapes into smaller and smaller ones, until they all become so small that they are essentially the texture. And that's what I did on the glass cup of water and also the ceramic dishes. So as a reminder, here's what we started out with. Yes, very crude and messy, but the actual foundation was already there, because all these different areas were roughly the big shapes that made up the cup. It would be easier to see if we map things out like this and comparing them side by side. See? So the first thing we have to do now is refining this into a more solid and more accurate shapes. And while we were at it, I also added some simple gradations in some of the bigger areas like this. One is because that's how it is in the reference, and second, it is best to avoid big areas with just one flat monotonous color, because it may look quite boring, and we hate boring things, even more than ugly things. And anyway, the result will look somewhat like this. From now on, the job is simple. I see it in the reference, I put it in my painting. It's literally just that. Nothing more, nothing less. And I know it sounds kinda depressing and grueling, but it's just what it is. And don't worry, at first it will be hard, but with more practices, you will 100% get used to it. And over time, you may even start to enjoy the process, just like me. Welcome to this site in advance. Anyway, the biggest upside of this method is no doubt versatility. You can render anything and everything you want with this method, and believe me, as I have used this to paint all of these: glass, metal, cloth, organic matters, inorganic matters, all of them. Not only that, this method can be transferable to any kind of art medium as well. Using this, you can pretty much paint anything in any art programs as long as you have a way to put out a patch of colors. And also, it's not limited to just digital art either. This can also be applied to traditional art as well. Well, in theory at least, I haven't tested this myself, so I shouldn't say it for sure like that. So the traditional art part is to be tested. Anyway, my point is the raw dog method is versatile, both in terms of targeted materials and art mediums. And another plus point is aesthetic. Since you literally put down every single brush stroke, the result will have a very lovely painterly look. Something that only you can make, because you are the one painting all of them. So if you want something painterly, this is the way to go. On the other hand, the downside is that it takes a lot of time and effort and patience, like a lot of them. So it can be quite discouraging at first. In order to build up your confidence and also your skill, I recommend you start with something simple first. And my personal recommendation would be cakes, unsurprisingly, and preferably cakes that have been sliced. Mostly because they are usually small, but consisted of quite a lot of different materials, like the spongy cake, the cream, the cookies, the fruits, leaf, jelly, lots of things. So they are wonderful study materials, not too intimidating, but full of different material to practice with. Another downside is when you work with pattern or repeated motif. They are usually not the most accurate and consistent looking things ever. And also, it's next to impossible to change the design if suddenly you decide that you don't like how things look halfway. So keep that in mind when you draw out a pattern. Things like that require quite a lot of planning ahead so that you don't waste time later on. So far, the worst thing about raw dogging is that it takes a lot of time and effort, which is a serious concern by the way, especially when you do art as a job. Those are literally money. So to remedy that, allow me to introduce you to Raw Dog Plus. Raw Dog gets smarter and a little bit faster. So for this method, we will use a ton of texture brushes to create a texture. And then using one brush to refine the shapes and also add some finishing touches. So here the refining shapes and the texturings are two different things. And we will use this cake over here to demonstrate this method. For the texturing, you can use any brush that has weird shape, texture or pattern to it, and you can use them both before and after the refining step. When you do the texturing before the refining, personally I highly recommend you participating in the fine art of foreground and foredown, which means using as many brushes as you like. Don't pay attention to the brush names or its intended use. Human brush, fish brush, weird splatters brush, any of them, all of them. The more the merrier, the crazier the merrier. And then it's the refining time. For this, I recommend using a limited amount of brushes. Personally, I usually only use one, so that we can tame and unify the whole mess we just created. And in this step, again, I focus on tidying up the shapes and also making sure the value look good, and also added some more texture as well. I usually look for these unique landmark worthy kind of areas in the reference like this, and then add them into my painting. Doing that will make your texture look a lot more convincing, because it will create some variation between small and big textures, and that's why it is Raw Dog Plus, because you still have to paint some of the textures yourself. And finally, if you need even more texture, you can consider adding some in after the refining. But you have to be quite conscious of what brush you use and how you use it. In another word, be careful. Create another layer and paint on that. Just in case you don't like it, you can delete it without affecting anything else. So for this ombre cake, I didn't feel like it needed any more texture, so I skipped this part. But for this February cake, I did add some tiny bursts in there for extra fluffiness. So of course, the biggest upside for Raw Dog Plus is saving time and energy. I spent like 2 hours raw rocking the cup of water, but only under 1 hour for the cake, which is not like the most fair comparison because one is glass and the other is cake, but still it is a lot faster, However, the downside for this one is that it couldn't really be applied to every kind of material. I think it works wonder with busy and random texture like cake, cream, cloud, stone, rusted metal and stuff like that. But for something smooth like glass or shiny metal like gold and stuff, I think painting them from scratch is still the better choice. But it is still a great method because it saves time. That is very valuable. And as for the texturing brushes, I am not the most well versed in these. The one I use is a fizzy flower pack, which I will leave the link down below by the way. But I am open for any recommendation in the comment section, and thanks in advance. So the Raw Dog Plus do save some time. But I have discovered another method that saves even more time, because instead of cooking from raw ingredients, we just microwave pre-existing meals, which is adding texture using pre-existing images and the magic of layer mode, which to be honest maybe is something most people have already been doing for ages. But anyway, the table will be our guinea pig for this part. So the first is the refining shape steps, because yes, we still have to do this of course. For this table, it's mainly meant cleaning up the patches of sunlight and adding some darker shadow under the dishes. And also for some extra whimsicalness, I added some rainbow colors around the edge between the light and the shadow. And that pretty much concluded the refining part. Now onto the texturing part. So I downloaded this very lovely good texture online, and then I imported it into Krita, putting it above all the table layers, clicking on the alpha symbol over here so that it doesn't spill outside of the table area. And then it's time to once again participate in the fine art of foreground and foredown, which means clicking through every single layer mode to find the most suitable one. Because to be honest, till this day, I still don't understand the technicality of how this works, but I don't think we really need to. Like just cycling through them until you find something that looks good, and then maybe adjusting the opacity to make them look even better. Next, because we are looking down on the table and perspective exists, so we need to stretch the bottom out a little bit. And we can do that by pressing Ctrl T on the texture layer to select the transform tool, and then right clicking, then choose perspective, and then stretching the bottom line out. How fast should we stretch it? I don't know, I just eyeball the whole thing. Anyway, that's another way to add texture. And the biggest upside to this is, of course, you can add a lot of details with little effort and time. Because of that, you can also experiment with tons of different options before settling down as well. So whenever you seek flat colors, just add some texture in. It will be a lot more fun to look at, and it truly won't take that much time. As for the downside of this method, I tempted to say that you couldn't really apply it to a lot of different textures, but I won't, because I have seen people do some insane stuff manipulating those textures around, so that downside is probably just my own skill issue, so yeah. Anyway, where can you find those textures, by the way? From a lot of places. You can find them online, or Krita itself also has a good texture library to start with. For the online options, here are two sites I recommend: timelapse and Unsplash. I downloaded the wood texture from timelapse, by the way. This site had tons of textures that are high quality and really well organized, so that is very big plus. As for Unsplash, there are lots and lots of patterns on there, and I myself had collected quite a number, so I will share my collection with everyone. And even better, both of these are free for commercial uses, which means you can use it however you like and for anything you need. As for the textures that are available in Krita, the way I use it is clicking on this downward arrow beside the plus point to add a fill layer, and then clicking on the pattern on the left hand columns, choosing the pattern you want over here, clicking OK, and you are done. Now you can play around with the layer mode just like usual. But if you want to transform it, like doing all the fancy perspective stuff, you have to convert it into a paint layer first. And you can do that by right clicking on the fill layer, choose convert, and then convert to paint layer, and you are done. And of course, you can download even more textures on the Krita forum as well. And anyway, with that, I think the painting is done. Let's check out how it looks, shall we? So that's all I know about rendering, at least at this point in my art journey. Hope this one could be helpful to someone out there. And of course, you are totally welcome to add any tips or resources down below. Everyone will appreciate them a lot. Anyway, remember, this one is the wallpaper for April. $3 each month on YouTube membership or Ko-fi, and you can have it. As always, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you have a great day/night ahead, and see you later.